Chapter 1770. I don't believe you. Hearing this, Yi Xian was speechless. Damn it, these guys are not making a move. Beside Yi Xian, Dao rolled his eyes at Yi Xian. You. Yi Xian laughed. Let's go. With that, the three of them walked towards the great spiritual palace. Behind them, the mysterious experts dispersed. In the end, no one dared to make a move. Killing a mortal severing realm expert. Killing a mortal severing realm expert as an ascension state expert was too terrifying. He was definitely not an ordinary person. Although the divine level spring of eternal life was good, life was more important. In the dark, the young man who wanted to snatch Yi Xian suddenly laughed. Looks like my intuition was right. The big man nodded. This person's sword principle is so powerful. The young man said softly, that sword strike of his just now was also very casual. Hearing this, the big man's face turned solemn. The young man said in a low voice, he dares to be so arrogant. Even if he is not from the Sky Demon Kingdom, I'm afraid he is from a super force like the small cave heaven. He has backing and cannot be provoked. Disperse. With that, he turned around and left. The big man hesitated and said, what a pity. With that, he and the woman in black turned around and left. The Great Spiritual Palace. The Great Spiritual Palace was located in the center of the ancient God City. It was the core of the entire ancient God City and the entire ancient God Galaxy. To the cultivators of the universe, the Great Spiritual Palace was undoubtedly a holy land, because this place had the most advanced martial arts civilization. Not only that, the entire Great Spiritual Palace had 8 divine-level spring of eternal life. Cultivating in the Great Spiritual Palace, one's cultivation speed was at least 10 times faster than others. In other words, there were no weaklings in the Great Spiritual Palace. Therefore, countless people wanted to join the Great Spiritual Palace. So long as they could join the Great Spiritual Palace, it was like ascending to the heavens in a single step. However, the Great Spiritual Palace was extremely strict when it came to accepting people. What they valued was talent. This was talent. As long as you had talent, even if you were an ordinary person, they were willing to accept you, because they could nurture you. But if you don't have talent, even if you reach the mortal severing tier, they won't want you. Because of this, the Great Spiritual Divine Palace was filled with monstrous geniuses. Not long after, the three of them arrived at the entrance of the Great Spiritual God Palace. At this moment, the entrance was filled with people. The entire Great Spiritual Deity Palace had a total of 10 gates. Each gate was responsible for examining the geniuses who wished to join the Great Spiritual Deity Palace. In any era, talents were very important. Therefore, the Great Spiritual God Palace opened these 10 entrances with the intention of not letting go of any true geniuses and demons. At that moment, Old Li suddenly pointed to the right. Young Master Yi, do you see that table? Yi Xian turned his head to look. Under the city wall, there was a circular platform that was more than 100 feet long and wide. Yi Xian asked, what's that? Old Li said solemnly, that's the ancestral stage. Yi Xian frowned. Ancestral platform? Old Li nodded. It was left behind by the ancestor of the Great Spiritual Divine Palace. Inside it is a strand of his soul. In order to prevent the Great Spiritual Divine Palace from becoming corrupt, he specially left this platform. Anyone who thinks that the Great Spiritual Divine Palace is unfair can step onto this platform and be personally tested by him. Yi Xian said solemnly, the ancestor will personally test you? Old Li nodded. Yes. Yi Xian smiled. Interesting. Old Li continued, however, this ancestral stage is also called the death platform. Because anyone who steps onto it without the approval of the ancestor of the Great Spiritual Divine Palace will be killed immediately. Since ancient times, only one person has walked down from this death platform. Yi Xian asked, who? Old Li said solemnly, the current #1 genius of the Great Spiritual Divine Palace, Li Yaoye. He reached the half-step minor saint before the age of 20. He reached the half-step minor saint before the age of 20. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched when he heard this. Damn it. His talent seems to be even greater than mine. Old Li continued, it's worth mentioning that Li Yaoye actually didn't need to step onto the death platform because he was directly taken as the personal disciple of the Great Spiritual Divine Palace's master. Yi Xian said with a smile, the reason why he did that was to obtain the approval of the ancestor of the Great Spiritual Divine Palace? Old Li nodded. Yes. However, he really took a risk because if he didn't obtain the approval of the ancestor of the Great Spiritual Divine Palace, he would be killed immediately. Even the current master of the Great Spiritual Divine Palace couldn't save him, but he obtained it. Yi Xian said with a smile, all geniuses are proud. As he spoke, he turned to look at Dao Yi. Are you confident? Dao Yi said with a smile, I'll give it a try. Yi Xian nodded. Go ahead. I'll wait for you. Dao Yi said with a smile, all right. As she spoke, she walked towards a city gate not far away. Old Li glanced at Dao Yi, wanting to speak but hesitating. Yi Xian suddenly said, You don't think she has a chance? Old Li nodded. It's very difficult. Yi Xian was silent. In fact, he also felt that it was difficult. Dao Yi wasn't young and she was only in the ascending heaven stage. If she was in a place like the 9 dimensions, she would definitely be a genius, but here it was definitely not enough. At this time it was Dao Yi's turn. Dao Yi started to talk with an old man. About a quarter of an hour later, the old man handed a token to Dao Yi. The corner of Dao Yi's mouth curled up. She turned and walked in front of Yi Xian, then waved the token in her hand. Success. Yi Xian was a little curious. How did you do it? Dao Yi said with a smile, They don't care about the realm. Yi Xian nodded. I know, but they must have asked you something, right? Dao Yi nodded. I said I want to learn the Tao of Law, so he asked me some questions. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, You answered correctly? Dao Yi said with a smile, Of course. Yi Xian gave a thumbs up. Amazing. He realized that so far only Dao Yi had passed the test. Old Li also quickly cupped his fists. Congratulations, young lady. Dao Yi smiled. Many thanks. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. Do you want to try? Yi Xian blinked. Me? Dao Yi nodded. Want to try? Yi Xian was a little hesitant. Dao Yi directly pulled his hand and walked away. In fact, she also hoped to join the great spiritual god palace. It was good to have a companion. Yi Xian was pulled by Dao Yi to a testing door. After a while, it was finally time to discuss Dao with Yi Xian. Yi Xian was pushed in front of an old man by Dao Yi. The old man glanced at Yi Xian. 23 Heaven Ascension Realm. Yi Xian nodded. The old man said again, Your aura is thick without any impurities. However, it is still far from enough. At your age, you should be at least mortal severing realm. Next. Directly denied. Yi Xian smiled. Didn't you say you don't care about the realm? The old man glanced at Yi Xian. If you have other strengths, you can show them. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Tao of Time. The old man looked at Yi Xian. Understanding of Tao of Time? Yi Xian nodded. The old man suddenly became interested. Tell me. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Time and space are inseparable both. Nonsense. The old man suddenly interrupted Yi Xian. Time and space are inseparable? That is your understanding? Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he said, But is there a problem? The old man said coldly. Time is time, space is space. Both are independent existences. How dare you say they are inseparable? Ridiculous. Yi Xian frowned. Could it be that Qing'er was wrong? Definitely not. Qing'er's understanding was too forward. Thinking of this, Yi Xian smiled. I was wrong. Goodbye. With that, he turned around and left. He did not really want to join the great spiritual god palace. Therefore, he did not think of defending himself. Meanwhile, the old man suddenly said, Wait. Yi Xian stopped and turned to look at the old man. The old man stared at Yi Xian. Who told you that time and space are inseparable? Yi Xian smiled. My younger sister. The old man frowned. She is misleading us. Space is space and time is time. Both are independent. How is it inseparable? Yi Xian said with a smile, I was wrong. Goodbye. With that, he turned around and left. He felt that there was no need for him to explain, because Qing'er's understanding was too advanced. Not to mention this old man, even the supreme laws were difficult to understand, let alone these people. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly laughed and said, Wait. Yi Xian stopped and turned around. Not far away, a middle-aged man was walking towards him slowly. The old man hurriedly bowed respectfully when he saw the middle-aged man. Greetings, Elder Gu Qing. The middle-aged man grinned. There's no need to be so polite. As he spoke, he gazed at Yi Xian. I think he's not bad. Let him join me. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone looked at Yi Xian. Their gazes were slightly strange. That's because of his relationship with Chen Shi. He was clearly eliminated, yet he's been recruited. This is shady. Yi Xian glanced at Elder Gu Qing. Elder, do we know each other? Gu Qing smiled. Don't we know each other now? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, I've been eliminated. Gu Qing roared with laughter. Who said that? I'm the outer court elder, and I have the authority to accept anyone. From this moment onward, you're an outer court disciple of my great spiritual god palace. An outer court disciple. Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. Elder Gu, I've been eliminated. Gu Qing gazed at Yi Xian. Do you think the test of my great spiritual god palace is a joke? Yi Xian fell silent. Damn it. He smelled a conspiracy. Meanwhile, Gu Qing tossed a wooden token to Yi Xian. Come with me. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and then said, Do you really want to accept me? Gu Qing turned to look at Yi Xian. Do you have a problem with that? Yi Xian said in a low voice, I'm only at the heaven ascension stage. Gu Qing looked at Yi Xian. You don't want to join the great spiritual god palace? Yi Xian hurriedly nodded. Gu Qing said coldly, Then why did you come to participate in my great spiritual god palace's test? Yi Xian said, But I didn't pass. At this moment, the old man at the side suddenly said, You passed. What you said earlier about space and time being inseparable is completely correct. Yi Xian looked at the old man with a face full of astonishment. Fuck, are you so unprincipled? P.S. Do you vote whenever you want, or do you habitually vote every day after you finish reading? This was the great spiritual god palace's Lingxiu mountain, the place where the outer disciples lived. Needless to say, Yi Xian was quite shocked. Along the way, the weakest person in the entire great spiritual god palace was at the heaven ascension state. And it was this heaven ascension stage that also had a vigorous aura, the kind that did not have any excess. There really wasn't a single weakling. At this moment he thought of the small cave. The small cave was as famous as the great spiritual god palace, so it definitely wouldn't be weaker than the great spiritual god palace. It seemed like he was boasting a little too much when he said that he could face the great spiritual god palace. Gu Qing brought Yi Xian and Dao Yi to a courtyard and said, You will live here from now on. Saying this he turned and left. Yi Xian suddenly said, Elder Gu. Gu Qing turned to look at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, Can you tell me why you accepted me? Gu Qing said, Instantly killing a mortal severing state cultivator while at the heaven ascension state, he is not an ordinary genius. Saying this he turned and left. Yi Xian was silent. Evidently, the great spiritual god palace already knew that he had killed people on the street. In other words, the great spiritual god palace also knew that he had the divine level spring of eternal life. At this moment, Dao Yi suddenly said, Are you worried about something? Yi Xian smiled and said, Nothing. Saying this he looked around. I have to say, the scenery of Lingxiu Mountain is not bad. It just so happens that I also need to cultivate for a while. Cultivate to the heaven ascension state. He also wanted to be like Qing Er and cultivate to the heaven ascension state to the limit. After Qing Er's guidance, he realized that it was only meaningful to cultivate to the limit of a state. If he cultivated to the limit of the heaven ascension state, forget about the space-time state, even a minor saint would not be a match for him. Any matter, even if it was a small matter, as long as it was cultivated to the limit, it would be very terrifying. Dao Yi smiled and said, I will go for a walk and cultivate. Yi Xian nodded. Okay. Dao Yi turned and left, while Yi Xian came to the courtyard. He sat cross-legged on the ground, placed his hands on his knees and slowly closed his eyes. Soon, a river of time appeared in front of him. This was a miniature version. In the following time, Yi Xian began to study this dimension of time. The basis of his research was that time and space were inseparable. In other words, he focused on combining time and space and not solely studying the power of time. At this moment, he still did not know that the matter of him joining the great spiritual god palace had already spread like wildfire within the great spiritual god palace. Lingxiu Palace. This was the place where the outer sect elders discussed matters. Actually, he had wanted to leave since a long time ago. He didn't want to be involved in the quarrels of the great spiritual palace. At this moment, Gu Qing suddenly said, Wait. Yi Xian turned around to look at Gu Qing. Gu Qing said solemnly, Don't you want to see the super geniuses and geniuses of this world? Yi Xian fell silent. Gu Qing continued, The inner court is filled with monstrous geniuses. Don't you want to see them? Yi Xian glanced at Gu Qing. How monstrous? Gu Qing smiled and said, The weakest in the inner court is the mortal severing realm, and they can basically kill mortal severing realm experts from the outside world. The top two can even kill space-time realms. And the true disciples above the inner court are even more terrifying. Yi Xian asked, How terrifying? Gu Qing smiled slightly. Have you heard of Li Yaoye? Yi Xian nodded. It's said that he's the most monstrous genius in the history of the great spiritual palace. Gu Qing nodded slightly. He reached the minor saint level before the age of 20, and now no one knows what level he has reached. His strength is like the vast starry sky of the universe, unfathomable. At this moment the outer court grand elder also said, "It's not just Li Yaoya. None of the true disciples are weak. They're all monstrous geniuses." As he spoke he looked at Yi Xian. "Are you interested in seeing them?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "Yes. Actually, the reason he came to the ancient god galaxy this time was to see the most monstrous geniuses in this universe. His father had said that there were peak elites of the current realm in this place. Of course he wanted to see them. He had never felt that he was the strongest among the younger generation because he knew that there was always someone better than him. There was no such thing as the strongest, only stronger. Of course, he was not afraid of anyone from the younger generation." Hearing Yi Xian agree, the outer court grand elder and the other two elders all smiled. Although they did not know how strong Yi Xian was, since Yi Xian dared to agree, he must have some tricks up his sleeves. At this moment, the grand elder suddenly smiled and said, "There are 3 months until the inner court assessment. So, we only have 3 months. Within these 3 months, we will find a way to help you reach the mortal severing realm." However, Yi Xian shook his head. "I don't cultivate my realm." He didn't cultivate his realm. The three of them were a little confused. Yi Xian smiled and said, "I don't care about my realm." Jilin was about to say something when Gu Qing suddenly said, "Sure." Jilin looked at Gu Qing. Gu Qing smiled and said, "In these 3 months tell us what you want. As long as it's within our capabilities, we will try our best to satisfy you." Yi Xian nodded. "I need a quiet place to cultivate now." Gu Qing said, "Follow me." As he spoke, he waved his right hand and disappeared with Yi Xian. As soon as he took a step forward, he drew out his sword and slashed. At the instant that his sword slashed, bang! An expanse of light suddenly erupted. Rumble. The spectators watched with astonishment as Elder Chiu was blasted over 10 kilometers away. At the same time, the entire expanse of the starry sky started to be obliterated bit by bit. The spectators in the surroundings were horrified, and they retreated explosively. At this moment all of them were shocked. No one had expected Yi Xian's attack to be so terrifying. Yi Xian glanced at his hand, and he noticed that it was empty. He'd used the sword drawing technique just now. It was a pure drawing technique, and it wasn't a technique that decided life and death. Even then, his sword hadn't been able to endure the force of the sword drawing technique because he hadn't used the green profound sword. "Yo." Suddenly, Elder Chiu spoke with astonishment, "Your sword technique?" At this moment only his soul remained. His physical body had been slashed into pieces by Yi Xian. Suddenly Yi Xian vanished on the spot. Su Yan's expression changed drastically, and he was about to attack when a sword pierced through the center of his forehead. Bang! Before everyone's eyes, Su Yan was forcefully erased. His soul was obliterated. At this moment, this expanse of the starry sky that was being obliterated fell completely silent. He'd killed him. However, this wasn't the end of it. Yi Xian turned around to gaze at Elder Chiu, and his expression changed drastically. "Do you dare to kill the old man?" The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. "Why wouldn't I?" As he spoke he was about to attack. Meanwhile, Li Xiran suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian, and he hurriedly stopped Yi Xian. "Brother Yi, you absolutely can't kill an elder. Killing an elder is a crime punishable by death." Yi Xian blinked. "Is it a huge crime to kill an elder?" Li Xiran hurriedly nodded. "Extremely. Killing an elder is equivalent to provoking the enforcement hall, and they won't let you off. There's still room for negotiation now, but if you kill an elder, then there'll be no room for negotiation at all." Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "But will he take revenge on me in the future?" Li Xiran hesitated for a moment and said, "He might." Yi Xian frowned when he heard this, and then the sword in his hand suddenly started trembling. Li Xiran's expression instantly changed drastically and he hurriedly said, "He might not as well." As he spoke, he gazed at Elder Chiu. "Elder Chiu, you won't take revenge on Brother Yi, right?" Elder Chiu stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Would he dare to kill the old man? Even if I gave him 100 guts he would still. Meanwhile Yi Xian suddenly swung his sword. Elder Chiu was instantly annihilated. Li Xiran's face instantly turned pale when he witnessed this scene. "We're finished. P.S. I've always had a plan.